presentation. Thank you very much.
Currently serving as Commissioner of Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. Earlier, he has held several positions in Government of Gujarat, such as positions in transport, sales tax, industrial development, etc. Incidentally, he is also my batchmate. Now I request him to present his paper.
Other panelists on the dais, and distinguished participants. At the outset, I must express my sincere thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak about something apparently very dull and drab as waste management before this august audience. This must be, though we attend many seminars, this must be the only instance in my life where my batchmate is chairing a session and two of my other batchmates are in the audience. So I feel honored with this, coincidence that I see here. These are, though my presentation is essentially on solid waste management in Ahmedabad, but the focus would be on what are the challenges in solid waste management. And I'm sure these challenges would be generally felt all over the country in all major urban areas. These are some of the typical visuals that you see in all cities in India. How overflowing dustbins, cattle feeding on the litter that is lying on the roads. And I'm sure in many cities in India, this is usually this common sight first thing in the morning. This is the rivers in India and how we do not mind throwing all kinds of litter into the water. These are some of the garbage mounds, because most cities do not do any treatment of solid waste. And so that garbage piles up like this. The visuals at the bottom is of Mumbai. And this is the dump site where rag pickers come, cattle, dogs, vultures, and this is usually the site in most other dump sites in India. So the current world thinking is how to, the 3 R's, how to reduce, reuse and recycle. In India, in almost all states I can say, we are nowhere near these 3 R's. But 3 R's are been attained to a great degree in Europe and most of Southeast Asia. So if we do all the 3 R's effectively, we go to zero waste, resulting into no landfills. So with this general background, I'll speak a little bit about Ahmedabad, how we are doing waste management there, and then we come to the general problems in waste management. Ahmedabad is the 7th largest city in India and the largest city of Gujarat, with around 60 lakh population currently and a 26.61% decadal growth rate. The total city area of the city is around 466 square kilometers. It's got a density of around 11,948 per square kilometer, with a literacy rate of around 90%. And it's a major base of trade, commerce and industry in Western India next to Mumbai. And this is how it's been considered the engine of industrial and financial growth in the state. And this is the general civic administration of the city. For those who are familiar with municipal administration, the municipal administration in Mumbai, Maharashtra and Gujarat are very unique in the sense they create very powerful urban local bodies. In our urban local bodies in Gujarat and Maharashtra are not dependent on the state government at all. In fact, the only control the state government exercises over the urban local bodies is by appointing the municipal commissioner. Other than that, these urban local bodies are self-sufficient, and Ahmedabad's municipal corporation budget would be around 5,000 crores, and all these are their own income. Mumbai's municipal corporation budget would be around 50,000 crores. So that will give you an idea about how powerful these urban local bodies are. Despite having such financial clout and despite having a strong manpower, we still find it very difficult to manage solid waste. This is how the city is divided. There are 6 zones, 64 wards, 192 councillors and 466 square kilometers. As we all know that the Ministry of Environment and Forest mandated very elaborate solid waste management rules, which make it mandatory to treat solid waste as per the procedures defined under the Act and the rules. And currently, the Government of India is now going to enact the 2011 rules, which are just going to notify, which are even more stringent than the 2000 rules. I can say with all guarantee here, not a single city in India follows even 25% of the rules of 2000. I am completely at a loss to presume how cities are going to implement the 2011 rules, which are even stricter than the current ones. This is an overview of solid waste management. We normally, as a city gets more and more developed, you generate more and more waste per capita. In a city like in Ahmedabad, we generate around 600 grams of waste per capita per day. So around 4,000 tons of waste has to be lifted from different parts of the city and taken to the disposal site. 4,000 tons of waste, even if you consider the carrying capacity of the vehicles, you can imagine the huge size of fleet manpower that we require to just lift the waste from wherever they are lying in the city and to take it to a predefined space. And the typical waste characteristics in India is carbon nitrogen ratio generally varies from 30 to 50%, very low calorific value because of a lot of green waste, and it is very moisture driven because of the typical atmospheric conditions in India. The waste collection system in Ahmedabad is that we have around 11,000 sweepers who do sweeping of roads by employees, sweeping of roads. So around 1100 tons to 1200 tons a day is brought by the sweepers, which has to be taken to the disposal site. Then we also use mechanized sweeping machines to do mechanical cleaning of major roads in the night. We also have a system of domestic waste collection, which we call door-to-door collections. Around 1700 tons a day are collected through this route. Then there are waste collection from open spots where there are some popular sites where people dump waste. So that is around 300 tons. And then we have hotel waste. All hotels in Ahmedabad city, they supply the waste through a very different mechanism, where we have private waste pickers who bring the waste from the hotels. Similarly, biomedical waste collection is different. Animal and carcass waste collection is different. The flower waste and the vegetable waste is different. And then we have manual lifting machines. This is the deployment of machineries and equipments. And those who are familiar with the waste management, the kind of machineries that are involved, they're very, very expensive. So first cities need to have money. In fact, if you compare, I come from Bhubaneswar, and recently had gone to Bhubaneswar for a seminar, and I found that Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation, which does not even have 1/100th of the mechanical fleet that a city in Gujarat has. So because that requires a lot of money, and the kind of grants that we give from the urban development budget of the state government to our cities, it is not possible to deploy the kind of manpower and the machinery that is required to do a relatively efficient waste management system. This is the night scrubbing that we do through the scrubbing machines, before and after some of the visuals. We have a BRTS roads, and we have some major roads which we cover through nights in the night by the road sweeping machines. This is the door to dump system. We have a small vehicle which you call Chota Hathi at the bottom. That is what goes to the individual societies, and then it comes and it is compacted in a compactor vessel, and those vehicles are around 17 tons, and they take the waste ultimately to the disposal site. These are the lifting of bins. Then construction and demolition waste collection, that is around 300 tons of construction and demolition waste is generated in the city every day. We have a different system of collecting it. I'll discuss that when we're discussing the waste collection systems. Then for all the kitchen waste from all the hotels and restaurants, nearly 400 hotels and restaurants in the Ahmedabad city, their waste is collected through a private waste collection system, which is authorized by the municipal corporation, and we do not bear any cost towards that. For example, this hotel, if it were in Ahmedabad and the entire waste generated in this hotel, the hotel has to pay to an agency which is where the rates are decided by the municipal corporation, and that takes care of the hotel and restaurant waste. And municipal biomedical waste is just a private facility to which we all supply our various biomedical waste. For the animal waste and carcass, we have different systems. We have a river which people, in order to prevent people from throwing flowers and coconuts and all into the river, we put these colors there. So people are supposed to put their puja material inside to the colors, and then we dispose this material in the disposal site. Their transfer stations are very much required for secondary transportation of waste. I'll now show some of the visuals of the transfer stations. Then these are some of the practices in waste. I'll straight away go to the issues and the now the major issue is how to do waste treatment. In Ahmedabad in 2000, the first waste treatment facility started. It was by Excel Industries. They had originally contracted to treat 500 tons of solid waste and to make it into compost. After 15 years, of 20 years, now they find it difficult to sustain the system and they want to pull out of the contractual arrangement. Then there is another which had another 250 tons to make combustible pellets. Even they are finding it difficult to maintain that system. Then these are the four agencies which are doing treatment today. Around 800 to 1000 tons of waste we are actually treating either by making it to compost or into pellets. Then for the construction and demolition waste, we have a separate facility where you have given him 5 acres of land and he takes the waste from different parts of the city and makes construction material like bricks and paver blocks and out of the construction waste. These are some of the disposal of inert waste. We will come straight to the issue of major hurdles. Now these hurdles and the challenges that I will be discussing, they are typical of all Indian cities, so I am sure they will be of interest to the gathering here. One of the major hurdles in municipal solid waste is that we do not have segregation of waste at source. Though the 2000 waste handling rules talk about segregation, but we have nowhere, I know, in the country that people do a segregation at source. Then we have very low recycling percentage. Neither the government of India rules nor any of the state governments have any stringent rules about recycling, that what kind of recycling is mandatory. Then the composting and RDA plan that we have, they produce rejects far more than 20%, for which landfill sites are a problem. Then we have scarcity of land in cities for transfer stations, for processing and landfill activities. What is the problem of doing waste segregation at source? Firstly, it's the lack of awareness among citizens about the importance of waste segregation. Segregation would require more than 2 either bins or plastic bags, and there's an expense involved in that. And the question is, who pays for that? The urban local bodies are in no position to pay, and the citizens are not willing to do this at their end. Then there is no clear policy on penalties and incentives for citizens to encourage waste segregation at source. It is also very difficult for the urban local body to collect segregated waste, as it requires more resources in terms of manpower and machinery. And how much charges do you require to do that? In Washington, in 2001, I was there, and I found that in Washington, the Washington Municipal Authority, to collect waste from segregated waste from a house twice a week, twice or thrice, they used to charge $50 a month those days. That is in 2001. In our property tax systems in Gujarat that I know of, we hardly charge 30% towards waste management charges, and this includes both drainage and solid waste. So 30% in a flat which pays around 3,000 rupees property tax per annum is less than 1,000 rupees. And 1,000 rupees is what you get, that is if you are collecting that much from the city towards waste management. It is impossible, considering the cost dynamics of waste management, to manage waste in the way it has been prescribed under the rules with this paltry charges that will. So to succeed in segregation at source, we require separate bins for street sweepers and other waste collectors. We require separate vehicles. We require separate treatment facility by type of waste. And we require citizens' active participation, and they must be educated about the importance of segregation at source. We also require transfer stations and landfill site and disposal site. And in most cities, and all of you must have been aware of the agitation that started in Bangalore regarding finding additional sites for waste disposal. So much so that the whole city was turned into a dump yard, and the Karnataka High Court had to constitute a special bench of the judges to hear the case on a day-to-day basis. The judges got involved, and now they do not even know how to get out of the case because there is no easy solution available. So this is the problem. Even if we show judicial activism in waste management, ultimately there are issues which need to be sorted out. How citizens' ability to pay, the state's firmness and decision to punish wrongdoers, to charge money from the citizens towards waste treatment. So, and then there is the problem of land in most cities. I am not sure about how much of site is there in Patna for waste disposal, but in Ahmedabad we have only 110 hectares, and there is no other land available, and we cannot acquire land for waste treatment anywhere in the city now. Such is the opposition to waste treatment facilities. Then there are basically current waste treatment technologies and their problems. Most urban local bodies in the country are experimenting with technologies, models for door-to-door collections, segregation of street sweeping, involvement of waste pickers, and PPP partnerships. And there are no specific policies from government for grant or viability gap funding for capital cost. One of our batchmates from Bihar, Ravi Mittal, he was in the planning commission. The planning commission, under one of the planning commission member, constituted a very high power committee, and they went into with great details about the waste management problems that are faced by the urban local bodies and also by the waste treatment companies. And just after the Lok Sabha elections are announced, they have now submitted that detailed recommendation to Government of India. And we hope that some more, this particular issue, that who does the viability gap funding in waste treatment technologies, that is the issue. I am sure after this, if there is a acceptance of this report by the Government of India, we'll be finding some incentives coming from government towards this. There are currently 3 technologies, whether the technology is coming from US, Australia, Europe, anywhere. There are essentially 3 technologies, broad group of technologies available in India. One is municipal solid waste to compost. The other one is the municipal solid waste to combustible pellets. And the third one is municipal solid waste to energy. In municipal solid waste to compost, these are the typical problems we see in most urban local bodies. It's a heterogeneous mixed waste, it's not segregated. So the organic waste mixed with other waste, plastic, paper and sand, glass, metals, etc., enters into the process of composting, resulting into a lengthy and expensive process. Since the municipal waste is highly wet, it requires spreading and drying. So that requires large area for treatment, first drying the waste before you can compost it. And a very longer pre-processing time, around 30 to 60 days. So when you spread the waste for 30 to 60 days, it comes with all the usual problems for insects, all the stench that comes from the waste. Then there are paper and plastic constitute approximately 15% of the collected waste, but very little is useful in recycling, and selling price of such recyclable material is very low. And because it is high moisture content, it requires more energy input to make compost and make the process financially unviable. This is the reason. And also high inert material passes through the whole process, and then most of the plants are in the outskirts of the city. But the most important problem in composting is who does the marketing of the compost, who is the buyer of the compost. Today, Government of India gives almost more than 1 lakh crore in fertilizer subsidy. If the NPK fertilizers is sold at a subsidized rate, which makes it cheaper than compost, why should somebody buy compost? So Excel Industries is one of the top 10 chemical companies in the country. Even they find it difficult to market the compost that is generated on a day-to-day basis. One solution could be, that was made to the Planning Commission, that if government can make it a mandatory that to buy 2 bags of urea, for example, you have to buy 1 bag of municipal compost coming out of municipal waste. Such an intervention will definitely solve the problem. If you all remember, in thermal power plants, the issue was of what to do with the fly ash. Most thermal power plants had mountains and mountains of fly ash all around the power plants. Supreme Court came with an intervention that every cement plant has mandatorily to use this fly ash. Today, not a single thermal power plant anywhere in the country has a fly ash problem, because the moment the fly ash comes out, there is a truck coming from a cement company which is prepared to take it out. So just by one intervention of this nature, the fly ash problem could be solved all over the country. I am sure if an intervention comes that for every 2 bags of chemical fertilizers, you have to use 1 bag of municipal compost, I am sure the problem of marketability will be over. The other issue is municipal solid waste, the other technologies to combustibles. They are essentially called pellets, and they are used as a substitute for coal in the burning process. The calorific value of such waste ranges from 800 to 1500 calories per kg, and even lower due to absence of segregation, as I said, because we do not segregate, so the calorific value is low. And there also high moisture content of the waste makes the process longer and more energy intensive. And then the pollution control board norms say that you can only use this kind of pellets as a substitute for coal in a closed cement plant, so not in other industries, which basically means that the cement plants have to be located very close to where the waste is located. Otherwise, transportation cost will not make it viable. This is another reason why most of the combustible pellets, like we have 2 such plants in the city, most of the combustible pellets manufacturing process do not succeed and not financially viable. And ultimately, the question of sustainability, because they signed an agreement to supply power at less than 4 rupees a unit. Not a single technology in India today can produce power at less than 7 to 8 rupees per unit when you are making power out of municipal solid waste. When grid power supplied by the state electricity companies or by the private electricity companies is sold at less than 6 rupees, who is the buyer of this power? This is the reason why most of these agreements that are signed to make power out of municipal solid waste do not succeed or are not financially viable. And there are no specific policies now by any of the electricity regulatory authorities in any state which makes it mandatory for the power companies to buy power at from the municipal waste facilities. For example, when solar power was started in India and in Gujarat, that time the per unit generation cost of solar power is around 15 rupees per unit compared to around 5 rupees for grid power. That time the regulator enjoined upon the power companies that you have to buy certain percentage of established. So these are some of the major issues in waste management, and if there are questions after the presentation is over or at the end of this, we can have a discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahapatra, Kolkata. His research interests include economic development, international trade, and political economy. He holds a PhD from the University of Rochester and has held positions at a number of universities, including IIM Calcutta, University of Florida, and International Center for Economic Research in Turin. Mr. Abhirup Sarkar.
I will start with two caveats. First of all, the thing that I'm going to present will be a comparison of Bihar and West Bengal. I've left out Orissa. So it's just Bihar and West Bengal. This is the first correction that I want to make. And the second is that it's not a paper, I must admit. There is no paper, no nuanced analysis of the data. Data is available with RBI. I have just put them together to understand one important feature of the two states, namely that of indebtedness. So I'm just focusing on one particular aspect of finance in Bihar and West Bengal, namely indebtedness. I'm not looking at finance in its entirety. So this is the second correction that I must make. Indebtedness is important for a number of reasons. It's a drag on development funds. If you are too much indebted, you need to pay back with interest. So you have less funds for development. And also, if you are indebted in the loan market, you have to pay a higher interest to get more funds. It becomes more difficult for you to borrow more funds. For example, if you look at the monthly rates, West Bengal pays a much higher interest for the debt that it raises, the loans that it raises from the market, compared to other states which are doing better, for example. And of course it's important because states cannot monetize their loans, and they are often caught in a debt trap if indebtedness gets to an extreme level. Now we compare the profiles of indebtedness of these two neighboring states, Bihar and West Bengal, not only because they are neighboring states, of course that could be one reason, but the other reason is that there is a striking dissimilarity between the performance of these two states as far as indebtedness is concerned. You see, debt in West Bengal, let's say around 95, 96 to 99, 2000, I'm just talking about an average. Bihar, during this period, was the most indebted state among all the non-spatial category states. And West Bengal was about the average. strangely, you see, uh, okay, strangely, by the end of March 2013, the position just got reversed. Bihar's debt GSDP, gross state domestic product ratio, became 24.8%. It was again about the average debt GSDP ratio for all NSC states. And West Bengal by then had become the most indebted state among all NSC states. So during the period under study, West Bengal has really, indebtedness in West Bengal has really increased. It has become from an average state to the most indebted state, and Bihar, on the other hand, has become, it started being being the most indebted state, but it ended up as more or less an average state as far as indebtedness is concerned. So we want to study or understand, the first purpose is to understand the reasons for this extreme performance. I'm interested in this. I just got interested in this because the fourth, State Finance Commission that is going on now in West Bengal, I'm a part of it, and so I found that the most acute problem of West Bengal finance is its indebtedness. So I was trying to understand how indebtedness has behaved in other states, and I found Bihar as an extreme example, which has done well. So I want to understand the reasons for this extreme behavior. And also, in this context, I want to understand the role of implementing FRBM. Let me explain. FRBM is Federal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This was an act which was enacted around 2005-06, which said that this is roughly what it said that each state has to limit its fiscal deficit to 2.5% of its gross state domestic product. There were certain deadlines, of course, and if a state could not achieve that target, then it's not going to get some crucial central grants. So basically the idea was to reduce indebtedness of states. Now, of course, a state had the option of not accepting FRBM, but in that case the state would lose funds, central funds. Now this FRBM will become important in our understanding the performance because Bihar was a state which adopted FRBM very early, around I think 2005 or 6, I have to see, and West Bengal adopted it much later in 2010. Now that could be one reason, but we will have more things to say about that. So the second purpose is to understand the effect of implementing FRBM. This is roughly how the outstanding liabilities look like in the two states. This is the blue line is for West Bengal, red line is for Bihar. This is outstanding debt, and let me, basically in 1991, Bihar's outstanding liabilities were about 20% higher than that of West Bengal. By 1997, they were roughly equal, and then the divergence started increasing, and by 2014, West Bengal's outstanding liabilities were almost 3 times that of Bihar. So, if you calculate the average annual growth, West Bengal's debt has increased at a much higher rate, at 6.8%. Bihar's is only 3.8%, and it's much lower. This growth rate of outstanding liabilities for Bihar is much lower than the all India average. For all states, it's just 5.6%. 7%. So basically, we want to understand how Bihar's performance, how Bihar could perform this well, as far as, checking of indebtedness is concerned. If you look at outstanding liabilities as percentage of GSDP, this is how it looks. Basically, debt GSDP ratio has been increasing for all states, till 2006-7. Till 2006-7, it's increasing, roughly increasing. And it has started falling from since then. The fall in Bihar was spectacular. So much so that the ratio is almost equal to the all India average now. If you just look at that, this sharp decline after 2006-7 in Bihar. This is something that we want to understand. Okay. And of course, West Bengal has not been able to reduce its debt GSDP ratio to that extent, as is clear from this picture. It is falling all right, but the rate of fall is much slower. Okay, I'm just looking at some indicators, debt servicing indicators. This is interest payments to revenue receipts. If you look at that, interest payments are much higher compared to revenue receipts in West Bengal. For Bihar, it's almost like the all India average. Again, it follows the same pattern, that it has started falling after a point, and this is debt servicing. Okay, this is interest payment to GSDP. Again, here Bihar and West Bengal, you can see they are sort of together. All states are much lower. And finally, debt servicing indicators, interest payment to revenue expenditure. Here again, West Bengal is much higher. Interest payments are much higher. Bihar and all states are almost together. Now, this, we will come back to this later. You see, as far as, if you just compare interest payments to GSDP, West Bengal and Bihar are sort of together. But when you compare interest payments to revenue receipts, West Bengal is much higher. So that sort of indicates that revenue receipts are much lower in West Bengal compared to Bihar. That is something that we will look at. Revenue receipt is in the denominator. So if it is small, this figure is going to go up. So for West Bengal, it seems that revenue receipts are much smaller compared to Bihar. Okay, this I'll just skip. Reserve Bank uses another criterion, debt sustainability. G is growth of GSDP and I is the rate of interest. And Reserve Bank thinks that if this is positive, then debt is sustainable. Now, this is, well, as we can see, G minus I became negative around 2003-04 for both states, but then it has been continuously improving since then. This is an imperfect indicator in the sense that the correlation between growth and revenue collection would matter. You see, it's not the case that in all the states, the revenue collection machinery performs equally well. So it is possible that in some states, growth in GSDP would lead to the collection of more taxes, while in some other states, it might lead to collection of less taxes. So this is an imperfect indicator, but anyway, Reserve Bank uses this. Similarly, debt sustainability, this is K is growth of public debt, and G is growth of GSDP. Anyway, this is another picture, and we can, it exhibits basically a similar pattern. and Bihar is way above average in managing debt sustainability. West Bengal is below average, as you can see. Now, we try to understand the reason behind the better performance of Bihar. This is what we are trying to do. For that, we calculate total receipts in a state, excluding loans, total receipts from all sources, minus loans, of course not loans, divided by total expenditure. So roughly, this is the income expenditure ratio of a state. And if you look at the performance, you see West Bengal lies way below. Bihar's performance, sometimes it's together with all states, but sometimes it's better, sometimes it's slightly lower. But West Bengal is clearly much below, both with respect to Bihar and with respect to all states. So what we understand, we can understand from here is that West Bengal's income is less compared to its expenditure when we compare West Bengal with Bihar. So we want to understand why. So we basically look at the income side first and then the expenditure side first. We try to see why Bihar's income, is it the case that Bihar's income is higher than that of West Bengal, or is it the expenditure side which is lower, or both? What is exactly the case? As I said, there is no nuanced analysis. One could have done that, but I haven't here done that here. So income expenditure ratio depends on both income and expenditure. And I said low income expenditure ratio in West Bengal is responsible for the accumulation of its debt. So first we look at the income side. As far as income is concerned, we look at first total receipts, total income, let's say, minus taxes. Then we split it up into three parts: tax revenue, non-tax revenue, and central transfers. Now if we look at that, you see revenue receipt, total revenue receipt is much higher. This is as a percentage of GSDP, of course, is much higher in West Bengal, in Bihar, compared to both all states and West Bengal. Now, part of this could be because of lower GSDP of Bihar. But in any case, one has to admit that compared to GSDP, Bihar's revenue receipt is much higher when you compare Bihar with the average as well as with West Bengal. Now if you look at, given this, we would like to understand what is responsible for this higher revenue receipt. Is it tax income, non-tax income, or central transfers? So if you look at own tax revenue, for Bihar and West Bengal, they are roughly the same. You see, both lie way below the all India average. It's increasing, the trend is increasing, but it's mostly below 5%, above 4%, but below 5%, which is way below the all India average. So as far as tax collection is concerned, both West Bengal and Bihar are not so good performers. Their tax collection can certainly be increased in both these states. If you look at own non-tax revenue, again, both West Bengal and Bihar sort of they are together. Both are bad performers. West Bengal is, off late, West Bengal is doing very badly. And more important, after 2008-10, there has been a downturn in non-tax revenue collection. So, you see, neither tax revenue nor non-tax revenue can explain the higher revenue receipt of Bihar. So it has to be the third one, and this is indeed the third one. It is the central transfers which are much higher in Bihar. compared to West Bengal. Now, why is that? The reason I think is basically, okay, tax revenue, I'll just skip this. You see, the reason is probably because of lower indices of development in Bihar compared to West Bengal. West Bengal is an average state. So it would, one would expect that it would get average central grants, which is indeed the case. You see, central grants in West Bengal and all states are roughly the same. Just it basically reflects the fact that West Bengal is an average state, both in terms of per capita income and other indices, whatever the Finance Commission uses. Whereas central, if you go by these indices, the same indices would put Bihar in an advantageous position, and it has got much higher grants compared to GSDP. Everything is relative to GSDP. Of course, as Bihar is developing, growth rates are high now, central grants are falling. So, sorry. So what we can say is that both Bihar and West Bengal need to increase own revenue, both tax revenue and non-tax revenue. And for Bihar, central transfers is the most important part of receipts, but this dependence needs to be reduced because as there is more development in Bihar, it is likely that central grants would fall. If you go by formulas used by the Central Finance Commission. Let us now look at the expenditure part. Again, Bihar's total expenditure, we have divided into two parts, revenue expenditure and capital outlay. Bihar's revenue expenditure is way above. West Bengal is above average, but way below Bihar. Capital outlay also, again, Bihar's capital outlay is way above. West Bengal's is really low, below 1%, which is abysmally low. And this has very serious implications for long-run development. Okay. So what we can infer is the following. The high income expenditure ratio has been supported by higher central transfers. This is what we can see from the data. And this definitely reduced long-term indebtedness of Bihar. But that is only one part of the story. I must point out that is only one part of the story. Prudent management of government finance is also important, very important. Why? Bihar was very early to implement FRBM, the Federal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. In 2006, it was implemented in Bihar. In West Bengal, FRBM was adopted at a much later date, 2010. The new pension scheme was adopted by Bihar in 2005. In West Bengal, it has not been adopted as yet. So these are measures that Bihar government has taken, which are laudable, which have definitely reduced the indebtedness of the state, apart from the higher central transfers. So these are, now of course, in a more, if I had gone for a more careful econometric exercise, I could have separated out the two effects. But I have not done that, as I said, in this presentation. So I go to my next question. Of course, FRBM, adoption of FRBM has played a role to reduce indebtedness. West Bengal has, lost a lot of funds because it was late in adoption of FRBM, something to the tune of almost, I think, 6,000 crores. But here the point is that, has implementation of FRBM affected developmental expenditure in Bihar compared to West Bengal? Now let me just explain this. what I exactly mean by this. You see, the states, now all the states almost, I think all the states have implemented FRBM. While doing so, the states had to reduce their fiscal deficits. Now, there are certain expenditure, revenue cannot increase overnight. You have to reduce your deficit. You cannot increase your revenue overnight. So what do? You have to reduce your expenditure. There are certain expenditure which you cannot reduce, like paying salaries, pensions, interest, and so on. So what you have to do is to reduce developmental expenditure. There is some evidence that states, all the states, not only Bihar and West Bengal, had to cut down their developmental expenditure because of FRBM. Now the question is, has development stopped? No. There was a different paradigm altogether after FRBM. Development was carried on through centrally sponsored schemes. So development became much more centralized after FRBM. And I think this had something to do with coalitional politics. Center wanted to have some control over the states in disbursing money. And as long as, there was FRBM, there was, dependence on the center for funds, states had to, remain loyal to the center to some extent. So I think this had something to do with coalitional politics. But the question is whether FRBM has affected, on the whole, developmental expenditures in the two states, Bihar and West Bengal. That is the question that we are going to look at. Now, if you look at expenditure on education, it is not very clear whether, Bihar's expenditure is higher than that of West Bengal. West Bengal is blue, Bihar is red. So there is no evidence to suggest that FRBM has affected aggregate, expenditure on West Bengal. Aggregate expenditure on education in Bihar. At least it's higher than the average, and it's higher than that of West Bengal. If you look at expenditure on health, again, it's not very clear whether FRBM has affected, has reduced this expenditure on health in Bihar compared to other states and compared to West Bengal. See, West Bengal had not adopted FRBM till 2010. Bihar had. So we are trying to see whether, because of adoption of FRBM, Bihar's aggregate expenditure on education and health was affected or not. And we find that there is no such evidence which can say that Bihar's aggregate expenditure was affected. And finally, expenditure on social sector is almost the same. Bihar is above the all India level as well as West Bengal for most of the periods. So we can conclude that aggregate expenditure in Bihar due to FRBM was not affected. However, what we can say is that, we have already said this. So basically, you see, what we can say is that the aggregate expenditure was not affected, but the autonomy was affected. Basically, Bihar had to depend more on centrally sponsored schemes. So exactly on which account you are going to spend your money was decided by the center, and that is certainly a loss. So this is the sacrifice Bihar had to make in order to manage its debt. It had to, by accepting FRBM, and I must say that, of late, the last budget, the government is trying to come out of this problem, trying to reverse the dependence on central schemes. They have actually, if you look at the last budget, the recent budget, central transfers to states increased almost 3 times. So that would, and of course centrally sponsored schemes have been reduced. So that would give more autonomy to the states. The total amount of money has also increased, but more importantly, this would give more autonomy to the states. The states can decide exactly where to pay the money. So that is basically what I wanted to say. Bihar has performed well in terms of debt management compared to West Bengal. That is very clear. This is partly due to allocation of more central transfers to Bihar, and partly due to better financial management through FRBM and acceptance of new pension schemes. And this might have entailed some sacrifice in the autonomy of the development process. Thank you very much.
Discussion sessions. To start with, we will have discussion on the first presentation, that is challenges in solid waste management. For this discussion, we have with us Mr. P.P. Ghosh as discussant, who will steer this discussion session. Mr. P.P. Ghosh is the Director of Asian Development Research Institute. He has been doing research in economics for last 30 years, specializing in the field of regional planning, rural development, evaluation of economic projects, and large-scale statistical surveys. Now I'll request Mr. P.P. Ghosh to speak.
Thank you. Friends, unlike the papers we had before, the presentation by Mr. Mahapatra was of a different nature. He was essentially reporting, this will come in? He was essentially reporting on an administrative initiative in a field which is very crucial, namely solid waste management, and the efforts that the municipal government, the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation has done. I have no comments on the implementation of the project. I'm neither an administrator nor an engineer, but by virtue of being an economist and a concerned citizen, I make some suggestions towards this project. When he planned this municipal plan for solid waste management, I think two things are most important. One is the fact that how costly is the affair, the cost aspect of it, and the second part is the technological part. I take that Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation is not in a competent position to take the technological aspect, that somebody else will be doing it. All that we need to do is to see whether that technology is economically viable for us or not. That's the issue. And second part that you can take care of is the cost part. It's a difficult job, but if at all you do it, who is going to bear the cost of it? Now, in this respect, one of the things that he reported is that some people are being charged what you call user charges or cost sharing. Isn't that, Mr. Pai? Some people are being done that. I think that is very important, that bulk producers of solid waste should be asked to do cost sharing of the whole project. But I presume this practice can also be extended to another group of producer of solid waste, namely construction and demolition people. They do the same thing, just as the hospitals do it. They also do the same thing. So hospitals should be charged, should be asked to do the cost sharing, and also the demolition and construction people, they should also, they produce a huge lot of solid waste. Another thing, at least in the context of Patna, I presume it must be the same affair in Ahmedabad also. A huge part of the solid waste is what you call polythene, bags that we get. Everywhere, smallest of amount of thing that you buy a vegetable or you buy a grocery or buy a fruit, a packet is given, which is immediately thrown away. Its utility is over, but its negative utility is so much that it clogs the garden, especially when the drainage problem is very high. I presume that it will be advisable for all of us, including the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, to do something where this use of polythene is what you call de-incentivized. Put a price for that. And some people have suggested that at least we can't prevent the use of polybags, but we can do is that prevent the cheap polybags that they produce, the very thin ones, there is a measure of micron. That's on there. I think some people have been talking about, the environmentalists, that very thin polybags can be stopped to produce either a low or with a heavy negative tax on that. That's, I think, one. A third thing is important is that everything cannot be done by the municipal corporation or by the state. People have to take part on it. I know that, we know that. But starting any project where people cooperation can be ensured is a very difficult job. It requires information, it requires knowledge, it requires attitudinal change, and so on and so forth. But to start the process, my own humble suggestion is that we could probably do it on a small scale in a 1 or 2 wards. Okay? Let it not be very one of those posh localities. There it is, of course, much easier. Nor do you start in a slum area, where again it's extremely difficult. But somewhere in the middle, pick up a ward and start this project of people's cooperation or citizens' cooperation in solid waste management. Let's see what results do we get, and then slowly and slowly, possible, expand it. That might make the job easier for the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. Another thing that I think it's not for the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, but in many cities, at least in Patna, the problem of municipal solid waste management is difficult because there is no place in the whole of city where the garbages can be collected. You see, if you put a small amount of place right in front of a house, and the house owner objects to that, the cities should be so planned that management of solid waste is much easier, so that there are places where things can be collected, things can be transported easily, and so on and so forth. These are the small suggestions I had. Another thing I wanted to tell you that sometime back in the IGC project, last time in Lahore, we were discussing under what circumstances administrative reforms become feasible. One of the things that I had talked about there is the fact that there must be a political will. Someone has to take a special step, move away from the usual practice, think out of the box to introduce a panel. In case of Ahmedabad, you said that many of the municipal corporations in Western India, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, etc., are legally very strong. They are very independent of they function independent of the state government. That's one of the reasons why Ahmedabad has been able to do it. But I was wondering, has there been any other reason for such efforts that you're talking about? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. Dr. Mahapatra, would you like to reflect on his questions? Now we will switch to another discussion that is on the topic of the relative state of public finance in Bihar and West Bengal. Here it will be Mr. Ratin Roy who will be steering this discussion. Mr. Ratin Roy is the Director of National Institute for Public Finance and Policy. Prior to joining NIPFP, he has worked in various capacities with UNDP and also served as Economic Advisor to the 13th Finance Commission. He holds a PhD in Economics and MPhil from the University of Cambridge, UK. Mr. Ratin Roy.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank IGC Bihar for giving me this opportunity to review a very interesting presentation. Normally, when people talk about West Bengal, we call these our 3 problem children in finance ministry parlance: West Bengal, Punjab, and Kerala. But the normal take is these are relatively rich states, and so you tend to compare them with Maharashtra or other richer states. It's interesting and I think very pertinent that the paper focuses on a neighboring state, because there is also a problem of location, specific structural characteristics, which makes this comparison worthwhile. I can't resist starting by admitting a major analytical conundrum that the 13th Finance Commission came up with when we set our FRBM targets. Not we, the commissioners. I was just the chief economist. So I take no responsibility for any political decisions. I should really, because I supported it. We started with the debt GDP ratio of India, And then from that, we said, well, if you have a zero revenue deficit, you don't borrow to consume, then you get a fiscal deficit number, obviously as a residual, if you know the GDP. And through that, we worked out FRBM targets. Now we found, when the Finance Commission started its work, that the center met its debt GDP ratio decline target in a situation where it was off target on the fiscal and revenue deficits. And how did that happen? Very simply because the nominal value of GDP, the denominator, grew faster than the nominal value of the numerator. And that's a very good example why you should be listening to the IMF, because this is what the IMF has been telling you to do for the last 30 years. And our own country's case shows that this way you can actually sort of skivvy out of FRBM. And therefore, when we talk about indebtedness, I think an important point to remember, and I'll come back to this in a minute, is that the numerator and the denominator are driven by different sets of variables. In the national case, it's inflation. In the state cases, I'll put to you in a minute, it is something else. All right. I'll stick to, I think much of analysis is very interesting. What I'll do is, as you said, you wish to define it. So I'll make some suggestions in that context. I think the first thing I want to ask is, this is very interesting because when you look at outstanding liabilities, this begs the question, why? What event triggered in 1995 this huge increase in the slope of West Bengal's outstanding liabilities? We don't know. We know this happened, but we don't know why it happened there. With Bihar, as your last bullet shows, you know, it's lower, and we know why. There was no money. So Bihar was not able to borrow in the capital markets at rates of interest that would not bankrupt it, and so they stopped borrowing. In fact, I'm in Bihar. Most of you will remember the state more or less stopped functioning in the latter part of that decade. So there was, if the government is not doing anything, then it doesn't borrow. But in the case of West Bengal, we don't know. Continuous government, and why that break should happen in 1995. So that's an interesting question, I think. When we look at outstanding liabilities as percentage of GSDP, I want to draw your attention to an interesting fact. That, again, the fall in Bihar's outstanding liabilities as a percentage of GDP to the national mean, the slope is greater, it seems to me, than the slope of the national mean. That's the green one, all states, right? Why did that happen? Did that happen because Bihar's GSDP grew faster than the national mean in that period? We know that's not true. We know that that phenomenon was triggered only from 2008. So it must be the case that Bihar's accretion of debt was slower, right? Not the denominator again. So that would be worth looking at, those breakpoints. All right. On what you've done on the debt servicing indicators, interest payments to revenue receipts, I want to bring to your attention one interesting thing here, as compared to the next slide. In my view, what you're seeing here is a level effect. Everything is falling, everybody is falling, but the reason why West Bengal is still in trouble is that its level of debt at all points along that curve is higher. Okay? There's no action with the slope here. The slope is more than okay. Whereas in the case of interest payments to GSDP, there is no level effect, right? This is OTR kicking in. This is West Bengal's poor own tax revenue performance kicking in. And, this is West Bengal's poor GSDP growth performance kicking in, and not some endogenous fiscal action that the government of West Bengal took. So the two debt servicing indicators give us two very different drivers as explanations for the divergence, and this will be, I think, in my view, worth exploring. Okay. Here, I think it would be interesting to ponder causality. We already know from the previous part of your exposition that Bihar's interest payment, that Bihar's revenue expenditure was falling fast. We also know that since Bihar was performing better in terms of its accretion to debt, its interest payment would have been falling. We don't know the orders of magnitude here. We don't know also for West Bengal. So we don't know what the causality is here. It should be interesting to specify that. Okay. I now come to the debt service indicators I have a problem with in life. And I just want to tell you what those are and leave it with you. I have a theory problem. You know, what I call the IGIDR is blind to problem. That's an research institute, which is, what is the theory underlying this? There is some theory underlying this. And as we all know, the economists here know, the theory here is dynamic efficiency. That the average interest rate on outstanding debt, if that is growing higher than GDP, it means that at least in that factor market, the economy is dynamically inefficient. And this is the measure that is used by RBI. I am skeptical about this in the context of a country as well, but in the case of a subnational unit, I simply don't see the logic here. Because the driver, GSTP, the growth of GSTP, is not endogenous to economic activity in a state, automatically. It has to be proven to be so. And the best case of that is a state, for instance, that has a large quantity of mining activity. Because mining activity, income earned in a state may not be retained in that state. Or a state which has a large quantity of remittances, Kerala. Remittances are not going to be part of GSTP. So this is not, in my view, an indicator of dynamic efficiency. And therefore, I would be critical of using this as an indicator. And as you say, it is an imperfect indicator empirically for you. But I think also theoretically, it is extremely dubious of the central bank to use this as an indicator in the subnational context. It's intellectually lazy. I've said this to the RBI, and I'll say it again here. Okay. The other one, the growth of public debt to the growth of GSTP. Now here, I don't know, I mean, maybe someone else could enlighten me. What is the theory? What is the theoretical premise that says that the growth of public debt, which is a change in stock, should be less than the growth of GSDP, which is a change in flow? Someone tell me, please, someday. The IMF hasn't managed to. So on both these indicators, I think, in my view, of course, your paper would be better off not dealing with it unless someone in the audience comes up with some sort of plausible explanation that deals with my accounting pedantry on stock flows. But I've never understood why this measure has been used. I've never understood why it's used by the IMF and why our own central bank has applied it so mechanically. All right. What else do I have for you? Yes. The discussion on receipts. Okay. You see, here the problem is that the analysis you do, I think, is arithmetically absolutely valid. What we don't know here is what the relative tax effort was. And there are measures for that that will not emerge from your analysis, but I think what your discussion here points to in terms of the next step is to ask the question that in a situation where Bihar was performing in a certain way, i.e. it was growing rather fast in one phase of the FRBM, it was not growing so fast in the second phase, was there something happening to tax effort in Bihar that was not happening in West Bengal? On West Bengal, I can tell you the answer because I've looked at it. There was no tax effort improvement in West Bengal. We know that. Own tax revenues in West Bengal are very low. You've said that yourself. They both have a long way to go, but tax effort, you see, also depends on level of GDP. This is well known in public finance, right? So if you're going to take GSDP as a proxy for GDP, with all my doubts already expressed before, then we have to understand better, let me put it this way, that ceteris paribus, a state with a lower GSDP, but the same own tax revenue GSDP ratio as a state with a higher GSDP, H0 is, it indicates better tax effort. So that is what your discussion here is pointing me towards, yeah? Okay. That's on receipts. I realize this is already boring except for public finance dorks in the middle of the afternoon, but I'll try and finish fast. On central transfers, sir, though, that's probably the only place I take issue with you. Because from your own data, central transfers as a proportion to GSDP in Bihar, if I read this correctly, declines, right? Whereas in West Bengal, and in fact in all states it rises. All states are sort of flat, but in West Bengal it's rising. Which means that Bihar's ability to secure central transfers in that very period of FRBM reform was actually going down. So Bihar was not getting as much central transfers as it got pre-FRBM as it was getting post-FRBM. Which means that successive finance commissions, in essence, and the planning commission probably, were less kind to Bihar during that period. Therefore, to say in the face of this that Bihar's performance, better performance, as you argue, is in part due to getting higher central transfers, I think again is arithmetically correct, but analytically I think it needs a little more unpacking in the face of this fact. Okay. Capital outlay as a percentage of GSDP, there is a causality question here. I mean, what is interesting here, the trends are roughly similar, is that the level of Bihar's capital outlay is higher than the level of all states and West Bengal. Now, all states is puzzling, but West Bengal is not. It's very simple, because when you don't run a revenue deficit and when you run a revenue surplus, then your total capital outlay, public, is your revenue surplus plus your fiscal deficit. So if Bihar was allowed as it was, a 2.53% actually later on, 3% FD, and it was running at 1.2, close to 2% revenue surplus, capital outlay was 5% of GSDP. You're getting that there, 4.55. It's come down marginally. It's actually the highest in the country. I said this morning in New Delhi. Bihar's public investment GSDP ratio is the highest in the country today. Good or bad, I don't know. It's the highest. All right. So that is the reason why Bihar, that's the causality driving here, that Bihar very simply ran its revenue surplus for its capital outlay to GSDP ratio was higher than West Bengal. Okay. I don't have anything to say on expenditure. I have a question on this education thing. It's quite interesting. This is more for the audience. We can, I think, both learn from this. It's interesting to see that historically, Bihar's, and by the way, I don't understand the term aggregate disbursement. Is it the same as TE? I don't know. But just to clarify, okay, so it's TE. Okay. So if it's total expenditure. So it's interesting that Bihar's historic investment in education, historic meaning only 10 years ago, is magnitudely far higher than the all-state average. And it'd be very interesting to know from the audience what the history of this is. What you're seeing here is other states catching up. And if that is what is happening, then that is orthogonal to the FRBM. That is why it's important for your study. But if that is not happening, if that is happening purely as a statistical fact, then of course what you're saying in the FRBM, is important. But if there's some other reason, then you have to control for this. Okay. My final point, development expenditure. I don't understand this term, but that is just for the record. I mean, I don't understand why expenditure in education, health, and social sector is development expenditure, not roads, but even allowing for that, I know, I simply do not understand. It's even worse than plan and non-plan. But because plan expenditure now is all revenue expenditure, those premises have gone. Anyway, my only point here is this, that you're right, of course, that FRBM, let's use a phrase we both like, that FRBM has not affected expenditure on education, health, etc. I just want to add to your argument, give you an extra point. At the same time as the 13th and 12th Finance Commissions were implementing the FRBM, they were systematically providing targeted incentives to states that were spending on health and education. Separately, a separate chapter. I did a lot of work on the health thing. My predecessors did a lot of work on the education thing. So the incentivization was coming, but it wasn't coming necessarily from the FRBM. It was coming from another chapter of these Finance Commission reforms. But if you look at the whole thing as one box, you're absolutely right. So this is just to sort of add to that. Okay. FRBM has forced states to switch from own development expenditure to centrally sponsored schemes. This is true if the devolution to these states has fallen. And in your particular case, that seems to be true from the data for Bihar, but not for West Bengal, right? Because the proportion of central transfers there fell. And that would perhaps strengthen your case, perhaps not. It's a political question. I mean, was the center more averse to the CPM than to RJD? We don't know. I wouldn't say it has compromised the federal structure of the country, but what it has certainly done is got the center into the business that perhaps they should not have been in, of spending on human development rather than trusting the states to do it. So I agree with you. I disagree with the last statement, but that's only a quibble. But it's an important quibble because important economists, much to my utter annoyance, have been saying something which is patently untrue, which is that this budget, well, they've been saying two things that I don't think are true. One is debatable, the second is not. It's a point of fact. I said it this morning, and I have a rather rude word for it, which I will not mention here. It begins with B. But the interim budget of the Chidambaram government made this switch you mentioned. This government, in fact, has reversed that switch slightly, 1,000 crores. So transfer from the central plan to the state plan by this government on revenue expenditure, for instance, is 997 crores less than the transfer from central plan to state plan made in the interim budget. I say this because I think this is a good budget, and I think doing this sends the wrong signals. Because what has happened here is a continuity, and that is desirable. But then to say that the government has done this and say it is becoming a fiscally federalist one sends the wrong signals to the markets. I also want to say that transferring, and we had a big argument about this with Dr. Dainan this morning, but transferring money from the central plan to state plans does not, you're not saying it here, but does not automatically increase fiscal federalism or state autonomy. Because the business process of doing that merely means that the signatory of the check changes. The schemes remain centrally determined. The accountability for that flows, as usual, from the state to the planning commission. It is not just an inferior form of devolution in the Indian context to a real devolution of the divisible pool of taxes. It is not a devolution given the current business arrangements in the government financial rules that govern the transactions between the government of India and the states. So I would be skeptical that this has happened. Again, this is not so much a comment on your paper, because of course you're right, that the central, the number of checks the central government is signing vis-a-vis the center has gone down with the amount you mentioned. But then to draw a normative conclusion from that, I think would be hasty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. I request Mr. Sarkar to respond to the queries.
Thank you very much for your detailed comments. This is not a paper. Let me admit. But your comments have made me sufficiently interested. I might think of writing a paper on this. Now, if I have to write a paper, I have to answer these questions. I know that. Right now, I would rather not. But if I have to write a paper, a real paper, then I have to, think about these questions, and they'll come in very, very useful. So, about this last point, yes, I just looked at the last budget. I didn't look at Chidambaram's interim budget. You are right. So I admit what you say. But anyway, about the other part, let us not. Those are explanations. So thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we come to question and answer session. We'd like to get questions from the audience, and our experts are here.
Yeah, sorry. So is there some optimal level of devolution from centers to states or states to cities? Because I seem to be hearing from both presenters that the current levels are not optimal. But the question is there some optimal to which we should aspire? And if so, how far is India from that optimal?
Well, you see, I don't know if there is an optimal in terms of money, but I feel that one can think of a list of services that a local body should provide, or at a higher level, list of things that a state must do. So if you go by that list, from there probably you can sort of get some rough estimate as to how much money a state or a local body would need to, provide these services. So in our the problem is that as far as local bodies are concerned, in our constitution, there is a huge list of things that a panchayat can do, or a municipality. I mean, municipality list is better, more rational, but panchayats are supposed to do almost everything. That's a problem. That list needs to be checked, rechecked, and shortened, in my opinion. Right from throwing away dead dogs to, all sorts of things panchayats have to do. This is the problem. So that list has to be, tightened and shortened.
I would like in 1999-2000, That time the budget of the Surat Municipal Corporation was bigger than the Urban Development Department budget of the state of Gujarat. And it was bigger than the Urban Development Ministry budget of Government of India in 2000. Today, it's only it's a fact. Government of India. So, and to give an example, it's only in 2007 when the JNURM came that suddenly Government of India had allocated a huge chunk of money towards the Ministry of Urban Development. In most states, the state budget in the urban development is very, very low, and it mostly goes towards salary payment of the urban local bodies. And if you look at the activities that are expected from the urban local bodies under the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, most of the states had not been able to evolve a strong municipal body by an act, nor are separate sources of revenue allocated. Octroi was abolished because it was considered a crude and cruel tax, but nobody was able to devise an alternative tax which gives the buoyancy which octroi gave. So as a result, even municipal corporations in Gujarat today are finding it difficult to pay salaries. Because octroi, to just give an example, octroi in 2000 was 400 crores in Surat, property tax was 400 crores, 300 crores, 400 crores was gone, and the city is now expected to fend for itself within the property tax revenue. Neither the state government nor the central government have been able to devise an alternative tax system for this urban local body. And there lies the problem. That time it was around 900 crores. Today Surat's budget will be around close to around 4,000 crores. Ahmedabad is 5,500 crores. Not at that time, sir. Not at that time. It is in JNURM, it suddenly grew many, many fold.
If I got you correct, please forgive me if I haven't. I mean, ultimately, the purport of the argument was that in Ahmedabad, if there is a better waste management system, that's a function of the following. A much greater, I mean, which is of course now problematic as you point out, but a greater amount of resources, which is leading to kind of machineries and etc. to be available, which is essential input in managing the cleanliness of the town. B, as kind of a scientific approach towards waste management, etc. That's what you were saying. And then you, of course, raised issues which are going to be, I mean, even Ahmedabad would be facing in future because of the problem of resources, etc. If this is the central thesis, that ultimately it's the function of resources, it's the function of certain techno-managerial ways of doing things. Now, would you then say that Patna or any other city which is having a huge problem of cleanliness, etc., if only these deficient inputs are kind of done with, I mean, they are kind of amended, if Patna would have got enough resources, if there would have been people who would have managed things in a standard, with a standard protocol of techno-managerial services, things would have improved. Is this the only deficiency? Because why I'm asking is that I think there is something about this civic culture which I don't think that came into an analytical explanation. I mean, in a very anecdotal manner, I can give you an example that when I used to be in Bombay and I used to see people standing in a bus queue, I used to see a person wearing half pant as a conductor was kind of doing something, his mouth was moving. I stood by and said, what is going on? Actually, he was counting how many seats to sit, how many to stand. And after having counted that number, he just did this. And all of them stood. Not even one person went and,
created a halla balla, why are you, I mean, there was enough space. But fantastic observation in Patna, if you go in Dak Bangla, there will be a one way, and Sipahi will tell you, please don't go, you will make some nice argument with him. तरी सा चल जाने दीजिए, उधर बगले में है, चल जाएंगे. 2-3 बार बोलिएगा, उसके बाद वो नहीं कहेगा कि बड़का भारी आप ही सिपाही बने हैं. It's such a huge management problem. So, I mean, is there something about civic culture which might have a history, in terms of cosmopolitanism or, exposure, etc., whatever. But is that the factor A? Is also, the kind of people who have been posted there with the greatest, with an importance of governance of civic issues being a prime factor for politicians to kind of win the votes? Have they also got into the factors of, ensuring a regular, better functioning? That was...
The question is, as you pointed out first, is the issues of structure. The municipal act which is creating the municipal body, how strong that act is. One very good example is, in a district, since you also belong to the same service that I do, if in most states, the district collector is the Maibab of the district. The municipal commissioner is also junior to him. The moment that is reversed, the stature of the municipal corporation rises. In Mumbai, the municipal commissioner is next to the chief secretary there, in terms of seniority. Same structure we follow in Gujarat. So the act itself gives us the complete autonomy, not for a single administrative proposal. A municipal corporation in Gujarat goes to the state government, whether it's a 1,000 crore tender or a 1 crore tender. Similarly, the act also gives us the manpower. For example, waste management requires a lot of scientists and engineers and environment scientists. In most cities, you will only have Safai Kamdar and one administrative head who supervises them. That's waste management in almost 90% of Indian cities. So it is structure and it's the resources and also civic consciousness, because as I also fully agree with you, with Mumbai I find, despite the population they handle, is one of the most well-managed cities in the country.
Mumbai. It's my home city. I've been there 110 years, and I have one interesting proposition to put to you. The reason why you stop in Mumbai when the conductor tells you to stop, right from my childhood, is there's a bus coming in 4 minutes. In Patna, you don't know. So take Delhi, which is a savage city. Okay, one thing works there, Delhi Metro. And people stop, and there is no overcrowding. Why? Because they know there's a metro coming in 3 minutes. So that knowledge is very important. On waste management, on this cleanliness and the culture and all that, I've been to Surat, quite often. It's not a very clean city. And Ahmedabad, frankly, depends where you go in Ahmedabad. You go to a party or a place where certain people live, it's very dirty. Some parts are clean. Same is true of Bombay. 80%, Bombay, if you take a helicopter up, which I was privileged to do once, I suddenly realized I live in a city of slums. And the culture of, management of anything in those slums is magnitudely inferior to the day-to-day thing that I see as a middle-class person. So I think there are many more commonalities between Patna and Mumbai in that socio-economic context that perhaps catches the imagination.
But to Mr. Dr. Ratin Rai's comment, it can be a great elation for Biharis, because I thought perhaps you kind of denounced Bombay to make it almost equal to Bihar, but I don't know whether you did that or you elevated Bihar to make it equal to Bombay. But anyway, I wanted to say to Professor Sarkar, again, when you started, as you said, I agree it's not a paper, but there's a lot of very important insights, and surely future research directions come out of it. So I totally commend your effort, even if your humility says it's short of a kind of a nuanced paper. Having made this opening observation, I would ask you one following thing. Is this, I don't know, I'm not an economist, so I may be wrong here, but I don't think that I agree with Professor Jatin Rai's observation when he showed that graph in which he said your main central argument about central transfers being the kind of main reason as to why the indebtedness finally remained controlled, along with the better management of FMRB, etc. And he showed that graph and said, look here, but it's just the opposite, because the central transfer / GSDP percentage is kind of, for Bihar, was kind of going down. But that was going down 2005 onwards because the GSDP was increasing. And that's why the percentage was going down. But in absolute terms, there's absolutely no doubt what Abhirup Sarkar was saying is that the central transfer in absolute terms was increasing. So, and the argument, or in the implicit argument that perhaps you could not develop, is that what you're arguing is that because the overall expenditure was being managed by Bihar with the major share coming from the central transfer A, and B, that share increasing, therefore the need of taking loan to kind of manage the developmental expenditures of others were receding from 2005 onwards, and hence, along with the management of FFRB or the commitment that you should remain the fiscal deficit into 2.5%, you finally kind of reverse that trend. Now, if that is the kind of, if I've got you right, then my question is the following. That you said, why central transfer higher in Bihar? Because Bihar is in backward state, there's an incidence of the backwardness is higher, and therefore the central transfer higher. If that's the basis, and that is, if you look at the Gargill formula and whatever nuances which has been developed, the same extra advantage was available to Bihar in terms of the flow of central transfers even previous, before 2005. So the central transfer in comparison to Bengal, which was a middle state, should have been, if you look at the data, in comparative terms at that time, whatever was the total volume, if the overall central kitty, which increased, and therefore the absolute quantum became much bigger because of a 9% growth rate and its, sustenance. If that was a Hindu growth rate earlier, then even then in comparative terms, the central transfer would have been higher for Bihar than Bengal. So if the central transfer was the main reason for keeping things within control, then Bihar should have been performing by and large similarly even in that period. That's one part. And the last, and another related part is that if that was not, if that was the case, is it that the Bihar was taking a greater interest in doing developmental expenditure, and at that time when the FMRB was not controlling it, they were taking much greater loan to do a better developmental expenditure? So if they managed it later, does it mean that the developmental expenditure was the one which had to be sacrificed?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have data on central transfer only from 2004. So, to answer your question, this is 2004-8 average, and then this is what I'm looking at, 2004 to 2013. So, to answer your question, I need to look at data before 2004. I don't have that data here. I can check, of course, but I will certainly check. But I don't have that data here. But, yeah.
No, the central transfers depend on two things. It depends on the Finance Commission horizontal formula, and it depends on the total tax take and the change in vertical distribution. All these three things actually increased in this period when Bihar's central transfers declined. So the denominator effect of a growth in GSDP as a ratio should have been outweighed by this, because for almost every other general category state, it increased. See, all India it increased, but Bihar it declined. That would mean that Bihar was growing significantly higher in its GSDP relative to GDP of India. That's not true. It wasn't that high. So to some extent, the actual formulae did sort of counteract against Bihar. But as he's saying, for that you have to, yeah.
I completely agree. Actually, for all this, we need a very, as I said, we have to do a rigorous econometric exercise, which I haven't done.
Yeah, that was the one which showed that what you were saying is right. In 10th and 11th Finance Commission. In the 10th and 11th Finance Commission, we got about 12,000 less than what was projected. And in the 12th Finance Commission, we got a little bit more than what was projected. There is a crucial difference between these two periods.
Yeah, my comment is regarding the urban sector presentation. I think he can bear that. And the response you had for this question about the efficiency, the optimal level of services that have to be provided, etc., etc. The question is, given the importance of the urban sector, the reluctance of urban local tax sources on taxation channels. Now, the reasons why this or why it done, I'm sure I be used to study why this is happening and whether all the intuitive have as to why urban bodies or panchayats don't resort to taxation measures, whether such presumptions are valid. Maybe that's an area where, as a practitioner, I would be interested in knowing, and it would be of relevance to not only the cities of Bihar, maybe the cities of India too. Would you like to react, Guru?
You are right that there is generally a reluctance amongst politicians ruling urban local bodies to raise taxes. That's mainly because those who are in opposition always oppose any raise in taxes, and those who are in government, they always need to raise taxes. And because of the elections always appearing in every year, either Lok Sabha or a parliament or a urban local body election, that is why there is always a reluctance to raise taxes. But having said that, what are the taxes left for a urban local body statutory now? As I said, it's only property tax and a very small minor taxes like in Gujarat, state government handed over the professional tax levy and collection to the urban local bodies, minus the central and the state government employees. So that left roughly around, with utmost efficiency, thing. Other than that, there is no other tax source in the state statute or anywhere whereby an urban local body can levy taxes. Then the only other way of doing is user charges. Most of the municipal corporations should actually do increase user charges and take user charges in a way. I just give an example. We inaugurated one of the most beautiful gardens in the Sabarmati riverfront. And all gardens in Ahmedabad, entry is free. I don't know, suddenly the CM that time said that why don't we charge something from them? So we decided as an experimental measure, from morning 6 to 8, no entry fee. From 8 o'clock onwards, we'll charge 10 rupees entry fee. And we thought there was a lot of opposition to it. But believe me, nobody opposes. And around 8 to 10,000 people visit that garden every day. It's an average footfall. And everybody pays taxes, charges. So probably a better way for urban local bodies, since there's a paucity of tax sources, is to explore the possibility to to levy user charges commensurate with the expenditure that they are undertaking. Another issue is that what activities an urban local body should do, that is there in the Act itself. For example, in the BPMC or GPMC Act, which govern us in Gujarat and Maharashtra, there's a list of mandatory activities. These are all these waste management, water supply, roads and all. But politicians are always interested in the non-mandatory activities. For example, running swimming pool, gyms. These are not, they look good, but they are not at all essential for the urban local body. A flyover is not our concern, but the ruling party will decide to do a flyover more than a solid waste management related activity. We in Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, we run 3 medical colleges, 1 dental college, 1 physiotherapy college, 1 nursing school, which are absolutely not mandated on us. And you can imagine the expenditure of running tertiary super specialty hospitals with cath labs and all, which you do in our city as a part of urban local body. So that is how the emphasis is also on the non-mandatory activities. They look popular, they look good, and they're immediately appealing to the public.
I think think one comment and one question. The impression is that by Professor Abhirup Sarkar's paper, that debt management is a very crucial thing in public finance. This is the impression. And rightly Ratin told that in 90s or early 2000, Bihar was not borrowing because there was no spending. People were not lending also. So I think the public debt management is only one aspect. Similarly, just see, Bihar's per capita farmer loan from institutional sources is one of the lowest in the country. So lower debt doesn't mean that a state is better off. I give you one example. Bihar has become a revenue surplus state. And this is a query also. I do not know the answer. Friends from the government, senior officials, Manoj Srivastava will tell us. During last 2-3 years, it has become a revenue surplus state. It has also helped in managing public debt. Government of India, 3% revenue deficit this year in this budget. Just see, Bihar 10 crore state, so much personals are needed. How it has done? My hunch is that by not filling vacancies, so many posts of employees, government are vacant. So salaries are not paying. The assumption is that these are non-development expenditure. This distinction between development and non-development, all planned expenditure are development expenditure, and all this expenditure from revenue is non-development. This is the assumption. That is why it has been done. For example, just I was told by Patna University Vice Chancellor a few months back that around 1/2 of the teachers' vacancies in Patna University are vacant. Teachers. So, if by managing this kind of thing, if it is true, they will tell us, then it has long-term implications for the state future development. Institutions won't be built. You are managing the current debt, becoming revenue surplus state just by compression of expenditure and current just spending on bridges, roads, capital outlay, which is important. So economics teaches there are several trade-offs there. So it should be adopted judiciously. My feeling is that this is a major concern which has not been addressed in the state. But other people will tell us whether it is true or not.
Thank you. Now we come to close of this session. I thank both the speakers for their exciting presentations and the discussions who have made very pertinent questions. I also thank all the participants from the audience side. Thank you very much.